If you're the main character in Dolly Parton's 9 to 5 and you've got one of those regular weekday jobs, you'll know Saturdays are the best. They're a chance to chill out, relax, and recharge the batteries. And let me tell you, I'm feeling like the Duracell bunny right now because my Saturday has started off in the best possible way. I was just minding my own business in bed this morning when my husband gets back home. First surprise, I didn't even know he'd gone out. About 10 minutes later, he comes up to the bedroom with a tray, or rather a chopping board because we don't own any trays, to bring me a coffee and a slice of pie from our favourite coffee shop. Also on the chopping board is this, a loyalty card from one of my favourite bookshops, and it's got 3 stamps on it. Once I noticed this, he pulls out this bag of books, which he has gone to buy me just to be nice. What I thought we could do is have a look at these books together, and then as I read them, I'll share my thoughts and we'll see if the boy's done good. Okay, let's have a look. The first book is The Architect's Apprentice by Elif Shafak. I think this cover is pretty gorgeous. It's got a shiny elephant on the front. I know of Elif Shafak. I've only read one of her books though. I've read 10 minutes and 38 seconds in This Strange World, which I had mixed feelings about. I thought the first half of it was really good when we were learning about the main character's life and the friends she made along the way. And then the second half turned into a bit of a weird caper and there was strange graveyard-based comedy and it kind of didn't work for me too much. I haven't heard of this one. I've heard of quite a few of her books, but it is intriguing to me that this is one that I don't know about. 16th century Istanbul, a city of wonder and danger. When a young boy, Ceyhan, arrives with a gift for the Sultan, a white elephant called Chota, the pair are sent to the palace's menagerie. There, they learn to guard against the scheming of animal tamers, gypsies, deceitful courtiers, and the mischievous Princess Miramar. Welcomed into this foreign land, Ceyhan and Chota travel to the furthest corners of the Sultan's kingdom and to war. But one day, when Ceyhan meets the royal architect, Sinan, he is given the chance to rise in court. To accept is to enter the marble halls walked by Princess Miramar, where the treacherous also plot, a true place of wonders and danger. Interesting. I probably don't read as much historical fiction as I'd like, so this sounds really interesting to me. I guess a lot of historical fiction that I'm aware of tends to touch on like Britain or America, and so reading about sort of Turkish or Ottoman Empire history is actually really appealing. So yeah, interesting. The second book is The Taiga Syndrome, written by Cristina Rivera Garza, and it's translated by Suzanne Jill Levine and Aviva Cana from the original Spanish. Garza is a Mexican author. I also had never heard of this book, and indeed this author, although there's a quote on the front that says this is one of Mexico's greatest living authors, so maybe I'm really missing out. A fairy tale run amok, The Taiga Syndrome follows an unnamed ex-detective as she searches for a couple that has fled to the far reaches of the earth. A betrayed husband is convinced by a brief telegram that his second ex-wife wants him to track her down, that she wants to be found. He hires the ex-detective, who sets out with a translator into a snowy, hostile forest where strange things happen and translation serves to betray both sense and the senses. The stories of Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood haunt the ex-detective's quest. As she enters a territory overrun with the primitive excesses of capitalism, accumulation and expulsion, corruption and cruelty, the lessons of her story unfold, that sometimes leaving everything behind is the only thing left to do. Well, that's got tons of themes to explore, and it's a really short book, and the text isn't particularly densely packed on the page, so I'm really interested to see how well Garza manages to explore all of these things. The final book is by Edward Carey, and it's called The Swallowed Man, and it is yet again another really gorgeous cover and another book that I've never heard of, and I've never heard of this author either. Trapped inside a giant sea beast with only the contents of the swallowed schooner Maria to sustain him, Geppetto yearns for the wooden boy he created out of greed but came to cherish as a son. The ship provides materials for the carpenter to make art in memory of Pinocchio and the other loves of his life. But the candles are running out and the mind can only survive for so long without company. So it's a bit of a spin-off Pinocchio story, which sounds really interesting, and I assume for adults. Those are the 3 books. What's really cool is I don't think I would have picked these specific 3 books out in a million years. I'm really interested to see how well I get on with these. Some of my favourite books ever that I've read have been ones that I've not necessarily picked myself and been given as gifts. So yeah, really excited to read these. I'm very, very grateful. It's an absolutely lovely thing for someone to have done for me. One thing I realise I've forgotten to do is to rank the books based on my level of interest from reading the blurbs alone, and then we can compare that with how I feel about the books once I've read them. We can find out if I can trust my own instincts. Probably not. Right now, I think the order in which I'm interested in these books would be the Taiga Syndrome first. It sounds quite intriguing, packs a lot into a short space. Then the Architect's Apprentice, and then finally in third place would be The Swallowed Man.
A few moments later.
I just finished the first book that I picked, which was The Taiga Syndrome. I picked this one because I thought it would be a short, sharp, engaging read to get me started. And boy, was I wrong. This was really tough going. This book follows an ex-detective who wasn't very good at her job anyway, and she's now a crime noir novella writer. But she's at a gallery one day when a man grabs her by the elbow, takes her out onto the terrace and asks her to take on one last job to track down his second wife, who's run away with another man into the Taiga. What is the Taiga, I hear you ask? Well, it's just the generic name for a snowy forest biome. So now I and you know what that is if it ever comes up on a pub quiz. You're welcome. Anyway, this sounds straightforward so far, right? Well, not quite. The setup and the scenario is straightforward, but it's really disorienting from the off. The way it's written is quite experimental almost, and very obscure. As the novel progresses, weirder and weirder events seem to happen, and the protagonist and us by extension start to sort of lose grip on reality and what's real or what's not. It's really strange and challenging, really densely written, almost like poetry. And to be honest, confession time, I don't get on brilliantly with poetry. I don't know what it is, if my brain's just wired in a certain way that makes me struggle to decode the meaning in poetry, or I'm just really impatient. Either way, I got the same vibes from this. The plus side is, just like poetry, there's some really beautiful writing in here. So to give you a couple of examples, there's one part where our protagonist is talking about how her fiction writing relates to her history as a detective. And she says, "It wasn't that I solved in my imagination what I was unable to solve in reality. It wasn't that my dismal figure transformed, thanks to the grace of fiction, into a glamorous heroine or an ill-bred villain. My new method was to recount a series of events without disregarding insanity or doubt. This form of writing wasn't about telling things how they were or how they could be or could have been. It was about how they still vibrate right now in the imagination." That last bit is so good. Like, vibrations in the imagination is such a powerful image. Another part that I liked was when she's just read the journal of the woman who's disappeared. And I'm going to abbreviate this a little bit, but she says, "The truth is, reading someone else's journal teaches you very little. Journals, I had to remember as I flipped through the pages, are written in an intimate code capable of escaping the reader's and often the writer's understanding." Like, that's such interesting insight into translation and writing and how we change meaning when we process it. This book is so laser focused on that point of translation. So there's sort of the surface level plot driven side of this, which is when she goes to the Taiga, she doesn't speak the language there, so she takes a translator with her, and they actually don't speak each other's mother tongues either, so they use a third language to communicate. But the obsession with refracted meaning permeates this book so much more widely. And once you spot it, it's like every other sentence is trying to touch on that theme. So she talks about things like, how can you describe the unimaginable, or how can you imagine the indescribable, or translating a smell into the event that originated that smell. It's really impressive, and both the author and translators are clearly like really talented writers, because that theme just like comes through really strongly on every single page. So overall, I think I was impressed with this book, but I'm not sure that I really enjoyed the experience of reading it. I think you'd get a lot out of another reading, but I'm just not sure that I would want to read it again. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's the Taiga Syndrome. So on to the next one. And I have just finished The Architect's Apprentice. I've actually finished both of the remaining books, but I'll talk about this one first because I read it first. This is the story of essentially the whole life of Jahan, a name I have now learned to pronounce correctly. But yeah, at the start of the novel, we get two flash forwards, one really far into the future and one sort of into the middle of his life. And then we wind our way towards those and through those points. The good news is this is really, really good. This is a cracking novel and I really enjoyed it. There are a bunch of things I really liked about it. One of those things is the depiction of Istanbul, which is like a thriving metropolis of the 16th century. And it's a really sort of multicultural place filled with people from all different races, religions, places from all over the world. And that was really interesting to me because I always think of multiculturalism as quite a modern phenomena, but it's very, very present here. I didn't realise this until after I'd read the book actually, that it was based on real historical figures and real buildings that you see the construction of over the course of the book, that you could go and visit if you wanted to. Characters like Sinan, the master architect, and Princess Miramar, and the sultans that take the throne, they all lived and were real people. And Elif Shafak has woven Jahan's life and that of his elephant into this story. She does mention in an author's note that she's moved some of the dates and times and events around in the book for the sake of plot. But I think that works really well and I learned something nevertheless. That's always great in a novel, right? Where you not only get pulled along by a really interesting plot, but you learn something about history or a culture that you're not familiar with. Speaking of the characters, one that I thought was just great was Elif Shafak's depiction of Chota, the elephant. He had like tons of personality, but was never too humanized. Like you had a real sense that he was a wild animal throughout this book. He never like started speaking or engaging too much in human emotions, but he was just a real load of fun to read and I just really enjoyed that. A lot of the subject matter of the book is about architecture and Elif Shafak speaks about and pulls on the threads of the balance between sort of beauty and strength and utility of architecture, and this looms large over the whole novel really, and I enjoy that when the novel's subject matter and its plot and its reflections on sort of human nature all mirror each other. I mentioned before that I'd read another of Elif Shafak's novels, 10 minutes and 38 seconds in this strange world, and for me in that book the writing was a little bit clunky. I think for me that might have been down to the modern setting and the marriage of the writing style and the subject matter not quite working. But in this book, I found the writing just sort of magical and sumptuous, and it was consistently a joy to read. There was something very comforting about this book, and I don't want to portray it as a cozy read because there is lots of death and illness and abuse and deception littered throughout the plot. So I'm trying to think of another way to describe it. I guess it felt like Elif Shafak was putting her arm around you and just like spinning you a yarn and telling you this really magical story from yesteryear. And I felt really comforted every time I sat down to read it. There were a few things that held this back from being a 5-star read for me. I think, as is typical for a novel that spans a whole life, you do, of course, see the ups and downs and demises of many characters. And a lot of that sort of was concentrated in quite a small number of pages and it felt a bit relentless. I'd have preferred that grief to be spread out a little bit more. There were also a few revelations towards the end that just, I guess, felt unnecessary, and I think the novel might have been better without them. Overall though, I thought this was a really great read and I'm very pleased to have read it. Finally then, we've got Edward Carey's The Swallowed Man. This is a sequel of sorts to Pinocchio. Well, not really a sequel. It expands upon part of the Pinocchio story where Geppetto is swallowed by the whale, or as it's called in the original Pinocchio novel, the terrible dogfish, which, in my opinion, is a much better name. This novel imagines what life was like for Geppetto in the 2 years that he was in the stomach of the whale, fleshing out, or fishing out, Geppetto's backstory as he ruminates on what he's done with his life, the women he's loved, and the boy that he has carved out of wood and brought to life. But was it a Pinocchio no or a Pinocchio yes? Well, to be honest, kind of neither for me. It was definitely a realistic account of loneliness and how you might slowly lose your mind on your own in the dark. Maybe even if you're not inside a whale, I think you might lose your mind in a similar way. It does a really good job too of expanding upon, I guess, one of the core underlying themes of Pinocchio, which is about what does it mean for an object to become a living thing, and the objects that are around Geppetto inside the whale that he either finds or that he makes take on new meaning and life around him. And there's an interesting converse theme of what does it mean for a living thing to become an object. There are a few creatures that are things more than they are living things, and Geppetto starts to wonder, like, at what point will he become just an object and no longer a human being. That was all interesting, and while it was pleasant to read, I have to say it didn't really grip me massively. I found Geppetto a bit annoying, a little bit of a bore. It all just felt a bit slight and almost like a creative writing exercise. And in a way, it was. Like, the story of this book is almost more interesting than the book itself. This was part of an exhibition commissioned for the Pinocchio Park. Yeah, you heard right. There is an entire flippin' park in Italy devoted to Pinocchio. It's not far from Lucca, in a town called Collodi, which is where the original author of the Pinocchio novel, Carlo Lorenzini, I don't know if he was born there or lived there or both, but it's got some ties to him. It's full of artwork and sculpture and activity for kids, and it's all related back to Pinocchio. So a load of art was created for this exhibition that Edward Carey put on in Pinocchio Park. And what's really cool is that throughout this book there are pictures or prints of those pieces of artwork that were created. So every few pages when you're reading, you might get to see something that that Geppetto has created or drawn or found, and it's a really nice, like, immersive extra to the book. It's really, really cool, and I imagine it would be even cooler if you were at the exhibition and you could walk around and read extracts from Geppetto's musings and the things that he's found and made. In the end, I'm glad I read this, but I wasn't bowled over by it. I imagine it's actually probably a really good companion piece if you're going to watch the new Guillermo del Toro adaptation of Pinocchio that's on Netflix. I imagine those might go quite well together because they're both a bit more adult in nature. So there we go, all 3 books done and dusted. How did they measure up to my expectations? Well, not too badly, to be honest. This is the order that I thought I would like them in, from best to worst, or most to least. Best to worst, they could all be good, right? The Taiga Syndrome let me down a bit by being slightly too obscure and strange. So that jumped to the back of the pack. But yeah, I adored The Architect's Apprentice, and I did enjoy reading the other 2, and I'm glad I did. Overall, if I was going to give Matt a grade for his picks, I'm going to give him, let's say, an A-, because I really enjoyed the experience of reading them. They're not books that I would have read or picked up myself unprompted, which is always a big positive. But there's always room for improvement, you know. We want to see even more books, even better books next time. Hint, hint. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you're already subscribed, thank you. If you're not subscribed, consider hitting the subscribe button, and I will see you next week. Toodles.